What'd I tell you? I tell you, we are just so fortunate to have a pianist, composer who's so talented here with us on Sunday mornings. Jackie, thank you for being here. And as I said at first service, we need to help get Jackie Sandberg's name into our community. I mean, this is first-class music that we're hearing. So you can tell them that, yeah, right. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So, all right, enough said for now, but we definitely want the community to know that there's such a special musician in our midst. So my college philosophy professor, whom many here have heard me speak of from time to time, Dr. Wallace Roark, who was also a Southern Baptist minister, frequently said, believing in God is nonsense. And what he meant is that there is nothing tangible to validate one's belief in God. Although a believer in God himself, Dr. Roark liked to speak in paradoxes and did not mean, as the term nonsense is often used, to imply that he thought believing in God is silly. He literally meant that there is no material proof to substantiate such a belief, and that those who claim to be believers ought to understand and become comfortable with this fact. Believing in God is believing in something there is no evidence for. I believe that the same can be said of the word spiritual and its derivatives, like spiritually and spirituality. Spirituality is nonsense. And there are dozens of different definitions of this word, which makes its meaning vague to begin with, even though it is often spoken as if everyone understands it in the same way. I want something more spiritual. She's a very spiritual person. It was a spiritual experience. Or as I often hear said of me, his sermons are not very spiritual. And I don't wish to offend, but in the spirit of honesty, I usually take this word to mean nonsense in the way that Dr. Roark did, and that's what I hear when it's being used, unless its users define what precisely they mean by it. Theologian Matthew Fox, for example, coined the term creation spirituality, which refers specifically to being inspired by and devoted to the natural world, which is not nonsense, but the very source of sense itself. Nature is sensational. But without such a qualification, most of the time that it's used, as its synonyms suggest, to mean something like non-material, incorporeal, disembodied, intangible, improvable, spirit, ghost, and so forth. As such, I am in complete agreement with those who criticize me or my sermons for not being very spiritual. I strive to fashion and present sermons based on sense, not nonsense, and that are based on empirical evidence, reason, and research, not on untruths or unprovable ideas that induce positive feelings that fool some into thinking they've had a profound experience. Sometimes I hear, "Your sermon was so good, it moved me to tears." I'm sorry. Occasionally, actually, my sermons move me to tears, too. But crying is human, not spiritual. In fact, humans are the only known species to shed tears. Be they tears of joy or grief, crying is the biological signature of an entirely ordinary human experience, as are the various physiological expressions of other emotions, all our emotions, like frowning or smiling or being wide-eyed, or the changes in our heart rate and respiration. When some consider What some consider a spiritual experience is really but an emotional shift, which is human and physical, ordinary, not extraordinary. Granted, the point of a church service is to create a safe space where our thoughts and our feelings can shift. But as a Unitarian minister who respects the autonomy and dignity of others, it is never my intention to manipulate your feelings or your beliefs. Our church services, my sermons, including our songs and our music, the readings that we have and other rituals, are about opening our minds and hearts to new possibilities and new ways of seeing things, not directing your thoughts and feelings in specific ways. And all of these elements are based on sense, not nonsense. So it's more accurate to say that a particular sermon or song or service or music was moving. It moved me. It animated me, brought me to life. Emotions are physical experiences that can be traced to our biology and our neurology. They are not spiritual, meaning they are not non-corporeal or nonsensical events. If by spiritual some mean that they want to go to church and feel something, then they should say so, and more importantly, be aware that this is really what they are seeking: a neurochemical reaction, a dopamine rush, not a disembodied spiritual occurrence that transcends or defies what is wrongly and sadly dismissed as ordinary, mundane, physical, embodied reality. To my mind, the entire 13.7 billion year history of our universe has achieved its greatest accomplishment thus far in the evolution of life, of sensation, of consciousness. And there is nothing more real, more profound, awesome, or more inspiring than this. Why do we want to leave it? The whole universe has been working to get here for billions of years. The 20th century Jesuit priest and scientist Teilhard de Chardin famously said, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we are spiritual beings having a human experience." But what's wrong with just being human beings having a human experience? From what little we know of our universe, how extraordinarily rare an opportunity it is to be human during our brief lives, the only creatures to shed tears, and to have achieved such extraordinary levels of consciousness that not only speaks, but rhymes and sings and writes, that not only walks and runs, but dances and runs marathons, that not only adapts, but creates art and builds rockets and thinking machines, that not only laughs, but makes jokes and celebrates and makes merry, that not only dreams while sleeping, but dreams while wide awake about better ways of being, a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and all women and all persons are created equal. We dream dreams that move us to act in the world, in this world. So I do not wish to trade my ordinary human experiences for nonsense, but to fully inhabit this world while I can during my all too short life, and to grasp it and love it and ground myself in its reality, including in its hardships and its challenges and its suffering. While here, I wish to develop my fullest capacity to be human, not to transcend it. Transcendence will come after my death, even if I'm only transformed back into the earth. And it will come all too soon as far as I'm concerned, for I do not wish to be a spirit. I wish to be a man. The root of spirit, spire, means breath. That's it, breath. Just living is spiritual. That's what Rabbi Heschel understood when he said, just to be is a blessing, just to live is holy. Breathing is our sacred ritual. Breathing, and thus the embodiment in this world, living and breathing, is the most spiritual thing that any of us can do. In her classic work on mysticism, Evelyn Underhill wrote that the mystic surrenders to the embrace of reality. And this is why one of our own mystics here at the UU Church of Spokane, the great late Reverend Dr. Bill Half, wrote that it is a misconception that real mystics are soft-headed and fuzzy-minded. As a scientist turned mystic, a chemist turned Unitarian minister, he understood that it is reality, not spirituality, physics, not fantasy, being, breathing, and living that gives our lives meaning and purpose and agency to make a difference through our lives in this world. Spire is also the root of words like spear and inspire. To be inspired is to be animated and alive, not only with breath, but with those insights and truths that move us and motivate us. To be inspired is to be speared. It's to be penetrated by values and principles and beliefs that guide our actions and our goals in the world. In this sense, spirituality isn't something we experience temporarily when our emotions are occasionally stirred into a frenzy during a church service or some other ritual. Our spirituality, rather, is something within us that remains there, sometimes for years, as long as we hold to those principles. Sometimes we evolve and allow others to penetrate us. But they stay with us for a long time, sometimes for our entire lives, for the purpose of guiding and directing our actions in the world, not beyond it. Some spirits are demons, though not literally. Don't worry, there's no such thing. But demons like greed and the lust for power or selfishness that move us to live and act in destructive and thoughtless and heartless ways. Those possessed by these kinds of spirits are undeveloped, stunted individuals who have not achieved their full capacity as human beings to truly love themselves and others. Some of the most powerful people in the world, one of whom is having a special day just this week, are the most unevolved because they have been guided by an immature desire to connect with others by controlling them, rather than developing their capacity to truly love them. As social psychologist Erich Fromm once said, "Love is a power which produces love. Impotence is the inability to produce love." He goes on to explain, "It is hardly necessary to stress the fact that the ability to love as an act of giving depends on the character development of the person. It presupposes the attainment of a predominantly productive orientation. In this orientation, the person has overcome dependency, narcissistic omnipotence, the wish to exploit others or to hoard, or has acquired faith in his own human powers, courage to rely on his powers in the attainment of his goals. To the degree that these qualities are lacking, he is afraid of giving himself. He is afraid, hence, of loving." On the other hand, Fromm says, care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge are mutually interdependent. They are the syndrome of attitudes which are to be found in the mature person. That is, in the person who develops one's own powers productively, who only wants to have that which one has worked for, who has given up narcissistic dreams of omniscience and omnipotence, who has acquired humility based on the inner strength which only genuine productive activity and love can give. From these definitions, we understand that Fromm is not speaking of love as it is often spoken of as some pie-in-the-sky sentiment that has no practical meaning. It is not a feeling. It is not a feeling at all, but a way of living. And it is the only way of our being fully human. To care and to be responsible and to respect and understand others. To me, it is devotion to this cause. Devotion to this cause. To becoming fully human and clearing the way for others to do so through our care for, responsibility for, respect for, and knowledge of that is at the heart of our Unitarian religion. It was the devotion to establishing a society based on such love, idealistic as it may have been, that ultimately led to the American Revolution in 1776, prompted by a historic Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what we're about. That's what everything in our society is supposed to be about. Opening the path for us and others to be there. And in pursuing our own happiness, not to get in the way or prevent others from getting there. As imperfect and vulnerable now as our union is, as it's turned out to be, the spirit of 76 that motivated the American revolutionaries to fight for a more equal, free, and democratic society is the same spirit, the same spear, the same breath that fills our liberal religion today, or at least it ought to, and it's supposed to. And I fear the values that once defined, bonded, and anchored Western society itself are being forgotten, and even worse, consciously discarded. Discarded even by many claiming to be Unitarians. So it is my chosen purpose as a Unitarian minister to do my best to remind us of that which once moved and motivated our religion. The same centuries-old spirit that motivated the American revolutionaries to declare their independence, to fight for it, and then work for its establishment. And not merely for the sake of Unitarianism, but for the sake of human civilization, which cannot achieve its fullest potential without a devotion to the principles our liberal religion and our society are supposed to be founded upon. Yet I was asked just last week how I can describe Unitarianism as a religion when I'm an atheist and our church has no doctrines or dogmas. Firstly, I agree with philosopher Bertrand Russell's broad definition of religion. Russell said, a complete philosopher, and I would say a complete person, will have a conception of the ends to which life should be devoted, and will in this sense be religious. In short, no matter what church they go to, everyone is devoted to something, and that source of devotion is one's religion. The fact that I'm devoted to the Enlightenment principles that once defined Unitarianism, human dignity, reason, freedom, and tolerance, doesn't make me any less religious than someone who claims to be devoted to God, or to the Catholic Church, or to Islam, or Hinduism, or Buddhism, or any other mainstream religion. It is the devotion that makes us religious, not the particular ideas. Secondly, the notion that religion is defined by theology, by one's belief about God, stems from Christianity's rather narrow notion of ideological salvation, that one is a good Christian, that is, if they believe Jesus is Lord and have professed this in a profession of faith. But as theologian Karen Armstrong reminds us, today's major religious traditions, all of them, Confucianism, Taoism, Hinduism, and Buddhism, which emerged around the same time 3,000 years ago, and what she calls their latter-day flowerings, Rabbinic Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all originally emerged in response to the injustice in the world and concern for the oppressed. What mattered in the beginning, Armstrong says, was not what you believed, but how you behaved. Regardless of its roots in an eventual emancipation from Christianity, Unitarianism has always been about how we behave, not what we believe. And this is why it was our religion, that passed the first religious toleration law in history, the Edict of Torda, in 1568. Guaranteeing preachers shall not be molested, nor anyone persecuted on account of religion. No one is permitted to remove from office or to imprison anyone because of his teaching. This edict, passed by the Unitarian King of Transylvania, John Sigismund Zapolya, was inspired by an earlier decree crafted by his wonderful mother, Queen Isabella, in 1557, when he was only 17 years old, stating that each person maintain whatever religious faith he wishes, 1557, with old or new rituals, while we at the same time leave it to their judgment to do as they please in matters of faith. Just so long, however, as they bring no harm to bear on anyone at all. That's our religion. That's our roots. All the way back to 1557, even way back then, when Unitarianism was decidedly a Christian religion, it was still about how we behave, not what we believe. It was about respecting one another, the freedom of belief, the right to reason for ourselves, and tolerance towards those with whom we disagree. Not only is this enough to base a religion on, it is what our religion has been based on for more than 450 years. Yet today, tragically, as far as I'm concerned, there are many Unitarians, especially Unitarian Universalists, who find these values uninspiring, who say they just aren't spiritual enough. The Unitarian Universalist Association, which has been the main hub of our religion since it was established not too long ago in 1961, has completely abandoned our liberal principles. And more importantly, our liberal behavior. Last summer, it adopted instead 6 euphemisms centered around an ill-defined word, love, none of which are dignity or freedom or reason or tolerance or independence or individualism or democracy. How do you feel when you hear those words? Right? You feel something stir in you? Dignity, freedom, reason, tolerance, independence, individualism, democracy. Those values that define what it means to be liberal. Gone from the UUA. They've even stopped calling themselves a liberal religion. Now they are a covenantal religion. In retrospect, none of us should be surprised by these changes. Since 1961, due to the association's failure to adequately merge two different religions into one, Unitarianism with Universalism, UUA members have increasingly felt it necessary to put descriptors in front of Unitarian Universalism. I'm a Buddhist UU, they say, or a Christian UU, or a pagan UU, or a humanist UU, and so on. But this was not the case earlier on, according to a survey of 12,000 members in 800 of our congregations conducted by the UUA in 1967, only 6 years after the merger took place. In that survey, less than 3% claimed to believe in a supernatural being, less than 3% of us. 28% considered God an irrelevant concept. 57% did not consider ours a Christian religion anymore, and 52% preferred a distinctive humanistic religion. Almost 40 years later, in 2005, the UUA's Commission on Appraisal conducted another survey asking members what they think holds Unitarian Universalism together. I mean, imagine even getting to the point where you have to ask that question. What are we about? Any ideas? We'd like to know. And the responses were all over the place. No consensus. After more than 4 decades, we stopped knowing what we're about. The Commission's report concluded with, despite consensus within the church that the liberal message of Unitarian Universalism is important in our troubled world, we find it difficult to articulate that message clearly. We know our religion is great, we just don't know why. We know we've got a wonderful message that's necessary, we just don't know what it is. They can't articulate the message clearly because they no longer have a clear message, which has left our liberal religion susceptible to those attracted to its openness, understandably so, but who want to come in and help define it for us or redefine it for us. And in fact, they have. It's too late for the UUA. It's no longer a liberal religion, and it no longer represents our liberal values. But it's not too late for Unitarianism. In fact, we now have an opportunity to reclaim the values and principles that once defined us: human dignity, reason, freedom, tolerance, independence, individualism, autonomy, democracy. These are the values that my life is devoted to. And I am, in this sense, religious. Deeply religious, as far as I'm concerned. Yet I am still just a human being having a human experience, which gives my life purpose and meaning. I guess that makes me a no-nonsense kind of guy. And that's good enough for me. How about you? Thank you.